So hi everyone. Today we'll be discussing strengthen the argument, and this follows from our discussion on assumptions. The last session that we did on YouTube was a discussion on assumptions, and I'll suggest before you watch this video, you watch the assumption session, and then do this particular video. So what we'll do is we'll understand what it entails to answer for a strengthened question. And then we'll be discussing some questions, right? We'll apply whatever the concept is on some questions, on some previous year questions, CLAT and AILET. And this is how it is planned today. Uh, Out of the three topics, as I had said earlier in the previous session, uh, the assumption family, right? So part of the assumption family is assumption itself, then strengthen, and then weaken, right? So out of the three topics, strengthen happens to be the easiest one, right? So getting right into the topic now, strengthen. What does it mean to strengthen the argument, right? So the argument that we come across in a paper like CLAT, right? It spans some paragraphs, or sometimes in AILET, it is just a single paragraph containing an argument. We understand an argument is a conclusion, something that the author is trying to prove, something that the author believes in, and then he provides support for that conclusion, right? In form of premise statements. Now, these premise statements could be examples, right? Could be facts, could be some data, or could also be an analogy, right? So, premise statements supporting the conclusion in the author's argument. And in the last session, we discussed assumptions. Assumptions are those premise statements that are necessary for the argument to hold, but the author has taken them for granted. The author has not felt the need to state them in his or her argument, right? We discussed how when I go out with money in the pocket to buy something in the market, the assumption that I make is, market is open, money in my pocket will be enough to buy that thing, right? So those are the assumptions in that particular action or in that particular argument. So they are not stated, but they are absolutely necessary for the argument, right? So assumptions, we can think of assumptions if we are drawing this analogy of a structure. Argument is this structure, the conclusion is the roof, and the premise are the pillars of support, right? So assumptions are those foundation very necessary for the argument to hold, but they are not stated in the argument, right? So let's say these are these foundation not visible to the naked eye, right? So this is how I can imagine an argument. Conclusion, premise provide the support, the assumptions are its foundation, right? And when you are asked to strengthen the argument, right? So they are essentially asking you what additional support or which statement, which option provides that additional support to the conclusion, right? So what essentially we are looking for is something new, some new information. I'm just drawing it in green, which acts as pillar 3, which acts as pillar 3 for the conclusion. So this is additional support on top of what is already given as premise, right? Now this pillar of support is coming from the option, right? So again, the option itself the option itself, right, could contain an example, right? We said the premise statements can be in form of examples, some data, some analogy, right? Some fact. So this additional support that's there in the option, the correct option. So the correct option could be an example, could be a fact, could be a data point, could also be an analogy, right? Much like premise. So this option is the additional premise for the argument. We are looking for a statement in the option list that acts as a premise for the author's conclusion. Although there is difference between attempting a strengthened question and attempting a attempting an assumption question. Assumption, we said we are looking for something necessary. We are looking for something necessary, right? This assumption is also providing support, right? It is a foundation, so it provides support to the argument, but it is also necessary for the argument, right? Strengthen, we are not really looking for an option that is necessary. We are just looking for an option that provides support, right? तो ये support भी कर रहा है और necessary भी है. The assumption is also necessary for the argument, right? In strengthened questions, things are simpler. We are just looking for an option that provides support to the author's conclusion, right? Now, how do we go about attempting these questions? So first thing first, whether it is an assumption question or a strengthened question or a weakened question, the first thing to take care of is identifying the conclusion, right? That seems pretty straightforward कि अगर हमें conclusion को strengthen करना है या weaken करना है, obviously we'll have to identify the conclusion first in the argument, right? But although it looks very obvious, but we amidst solving so many passages in so many different sections, legal, logical, English, even GK, we sometimes tend to miss out on that little nuance, right? So when you are reading a passage spanning some paragraphs, make sure you understand the argument well. And what is an indication that you have understood the argument? The indication is you have figured what the conclusion is, right? So the relationship is something like, we did conditional reasoning here on YouTube also, and you can sort of watch that topic again if you haven't done it. But according to me, the relationship is something understanding the argument, okay, right? So if I get what the conclusion is, so if I get what the conclusion is, it is sufficient to say I've understood the argument, right? Or we can say, in order to understand what the author's exact conclusion is, exact main idea, exact main point, what is necessary, understanding the argument, right? So this is sufficient. If I get what the conclusion is, it necessarily follows I understand what the argument is, right? So yes, when we are solving for strengthen, weaken, assumption, the critical thing is I get what the conclusion is, or I get exactly the claim to be strengthened. Sometimes what happens is the author has not really presented their own viewpoint. So the author has just narrated somebody else's argument. They have not presented their own viewpoint. Somebody else has presented it. Somebody else's argument is right there, and the author has just presented it for everyone, right? In that case, we are focusing on the conclusion reached by this third person, right? Or it could be a line, a claim taken from the passage, not necessarily the author's claim, right? Somebody else's claim stated in the passage, and we have to strengthen this claim. Whatever be the case, whether it is strengthening the author's viewpoint, author's argument, whether it is strengthening somebody else's argument, or it is, you have to strengthen some claim made by some person in the passage. Just get that claim accurately, right? For example, you are doing this question and you are not very sure as to what needs to be strengthened, right? It says person X claims, right? Or something like, which one of the following, if true, strengthens person X's claim? Now, instead of recalling and conjecturing and approximating, what do you do? Just go to that portion of the passage, read that person's claim, and then go into the question again, right? So the first critical part is identifying the conclusion or the claim to be strengthened. Obviously, understand what will help bolster the argument, right? Because if I understand the author is making a point that the economy has suffered in the last 3 months, right? Because of the conflicts happening in the world, right? What kind of option will bolster this argument, this claim? Again, we are looking for some data point, some fact, some example, some anecdote, maybe some analogy to actually support this view that economy is suffering or has suffered in the past 3 months. And precisely that, we are not looking for an option that says economy has been suffering for the past 10 years. We're not looking for that claim or option. We are only looking for an option that supports the view that economy has been suffering for the past 3 months due to the conflicts happening in the world, right? So be very sure of what needs to be strengthened and understand what kind of option will be correct. Third, the information given in the options has to be taken true. So if I'm attempting a strengthened question, I can't say that this option is not getting inferred from the passage because it is not an inference question. Or let's say this option is not very consistent with the information in the passage, right? So we are not actually doing that. We aren't doing any inference question. We aren't doing a central idea question that it has to follow from the passage or it has to get full support from the passage. We aren't doing that question, right? So in the options, and you can imagine that if I have to strengthen an argument, right? So we said the argument is this conclusion, right? And there are pillars of support, right? So if I have to strengthen this argument and look for a new pillar of support, I have to rely on something new, some new information in the option. So don't reject an option in a strengthened question just because it contains new information. In fact, we are looking for options that contain new information and provide additional support to the conclusion, right? So the options will have new information, treat them as true, don't suspect that information, take it to be true, and check whether this information provides support to the conclusion or not, right? All right, so again, there is a symbolic representation here. Okay, so passage, we need to support the passage, therefore, and the right option will provide support to the passage, and that's why the direction of the arrow is upward. The option is providing support to the passage, right? The option is providing support to the passage. So that's why upward direction. Had it been an inference question, so this is the passage, and do look at the video on inference also. So this is the passage, and the correct option gets support from the passage. तो inference में diagram कुछ ऐसा होगा, right? Inference, the option is getting support from the passage. The option follows from the information in the passage. Strengthen, the option provides support to the argument, right? And this option will have something new information to support the argument, right, everyone? All right. So we understand the drill. Identify the conclusion, and in your head you can imagine what a correct option would be doing, and then when you are looking into the options, treat that information in the option to be true and just check whether this information provides additional support to the argument. Okay. So how would the question stem look like? So the question stem will have words like strengthen the argument, support the argument, helps the argument, most justifies the author's argument, right? We understand all these words, the meanings of these words, right? I just want to draw your attention, and I think I did this while we were doing inference also, this support. So when you see this word support in the question stem, it could be, it could be a sentence question, it could be an inference question also. I'll just tell you how to spot the difference. So for example, it says support the passage or claim or argument, right? Then it is a strengthened question. The option supports the passage, supports the argument, supports the claim. On the other hand, if it says which one of the following option gets support from the passage slash argument, then it is an inference question. The option is getting support from the passage. The option follows from the passage. So just be careful as to what the phrasing is, whether it is a strengthened question or an inference question, right? Green wala strengthen hai, and the one in red is inference. Okay. Now, some strengthened questions will have options that provide the missing link. What is a missing link? Remember our discussion on assumptions? Assumptions can be those missing links. They bridge the gap between the premise and conclusion. They're necessary for the conclusion to hold, right? So missing link are the assumptions. And I ask you, will an assumption support the author's argument? Yes, of course, assumption is the foundation. They are not stated in the argument, right? But if they are stated in one of the options, it might just be the correct answer, even in a strengthened question, because assumptions support the argument, right? So overall, when we are going through the options, right, आप इसमें confuse मत हो कि whether this statement is an, for example, you are solving for a strengthened question and you don't really have to figure whether this is an assumption or not. Just look at that statement, take it to be true, and just check whether it provides support for the conclusion or not. Even if it is an assumption, it will provide support to the conclusion. So it might just be the case that an assumption is the correct option in a strengthened question. Okay. All right. So let's just put this into practice. Okay, we'll solve some questions, starting with this one. So it says political turmoil in a country is mainly caused by widespread violence and flawed economic policies of successive governments. Okay, this is what is given to us, that political turmoil, what causes it? widespread violence, number one, right? And number two, flawed economic policies, right? So this is number two. Two things are causing political turmoil. One, widespread violence, and two, flawed economic policies, right? Then the author's point is, if at all this has to be crushed, it can be achieved only by a dictatorial government. Only implies necessity, again from a discussion on conditional. So a dictatorial government, according to the author, is necessary to crush this political turmoil, right? Therefore, and now we have the conclusion, right? Therefore, the need of the hour again points out to the necessity of the time, need of the hour, is to elect a government which imposes fresh set of stringent legislations. So need of the hour is to elect a government which imposes fresh set of strong legislations. So after having read till the end, I understand the author by saying a dictatorial government is needed is not really referring to a dictatorship, because he uses the phrase elect a government. So you can't elect a dictatorship, right? So by dictatorial, the author means a strong government, right? Not a dictatorship. So it talks about electing a strong government, right? So that I can sort of infer. Now, so we have identified the conclusion. This is the last line of the argument. The need of the hour is to elect a government which imposes fresh set of stringent legislations, right? And we have to provide support for this. One of them is most forceful. Identify the same. It's simply asking you which options strengthens, right? Option A, espionage activities by enemy nations which contribute to political turmoil. So there's one more thing option A says, which is espionage activities. Now, nowhere in the passage espionage activities is mentioned. There's no reference to it. Do I just reject this option? Mhm. Had it been an inference question, I would have said this is new information out. But this is not an inference question, this is a strengthened question. So whatever is given in the option statement, we take it to be true. We are assuming this is true. And then checking whether it strengthens the author's conclusion. So it says, there's one more thing that contributes to political turmoil. Even to prevent that, a strong government is necessary. Had the author towards the end in the argument concluded that we need a strong government to crush political turmoil? And option A provides that direct support to the argument. Yes, even to take care of espionage activities that contribute to political turmoil, we need a strong government. Reinforces the point around necessity of a strong government, right? So option A is very good. B says the philosophy behind any economic policy, push from bottom, press from top, is to be followed to mitigate violence, and it is not observed. Okay, this is a philosophy, and by the looks of it, push from bottom, press from top looks like something, looks something which is strong, which is a stringent legislation, right? But we are not assuming anything. Okay, what it says is this is the philosophy that has to be followed, and it is not being observed. Does it support the author's point that a strong government is necessary? Not really, because it does not link this philosophy, push from bottom, press from top, to a strong government. So it does not really tie into the conclusion around strong government, necessity of a strong government, right? It does not really say that a strong government is necessary. For example, this is not being observed. Whatever this policy is, this is not being observed. And if the existing government starts employing this policy, things will take care of itself. In that case, we don't really need a strong government, right? And we don't know if a strong government would adopt this policy. So as I said, it does not really link back to the necessity of a strong government. So B, although it may look like supporting the argument, it is actually not. A is still a better option. C says political turmoil is due to corrupt establishment. Okay. What about this? So remember, our author was saying political turmoil is due to widespread violence and flawed economic policies. ठीक है, तो मान लेते हैं उसको A and B बोल देते हैं. Political turmoil is caused by A and B, widespread violence, flawed economic policies. Somebody turns around and says political turmoil is caused by corrupt establishment, let's say C. Will the solution now work? What was the solution? A strong government. So, for example, I'm saying A and B are causing political turmoil. The author is saying A and B are causing political turmoil. In order to address it, use this solution. There is an option out there that says actually political turmoil is caused by something C. Will the solution now work? We don't know, right? For example, there's some student who's not scoring well in mathematics, right? And the reason for that is given he really does not enjoy mathematics, or he really does not understand the concepts, right? So what will you do? You will help him understand the concepts. You'll find a good tutor and help him understand the concepts in order to get the desired result. So what's the solution? Get him a good tutor, right? Now the reason, for example, he was not doing well in mathematics, and the reason given is, right, that he's not ready to put in the hard work. He understands the concepts, right? He's just, for some reason, he's not putting in the hard work. Now, will this solution, a good tutor, will that help? We don't know, right? Because now the reason we are told is something very different. Maybe he needs some other motivation, right? And not a good tutor. So, so in arguments, when the author is pointing out A is causing something, right? A is causing something, and proposes a solution to address it, and there is an option that says actually it is not A, it is something else, right? Then we are not sure if the solution will work, and such an option tends to weaken the argument. Such an option will actually weaken the argument, in fact. So option C is actually weakening the argument by pointing us in a different direction. That it is not widespread violence, it is not flawed economic policies, it is something else. The moment I see an option that sort of gives an alternate cause to what the author is saying, then that option will weaken the argument. Remember this, and we'll sort of come back to this concept sometime later in the PPT, right? So option C is weakening the argument. And if you contrast this to option A again, option A did not really say that espionage activities are causing political turmoil. It said they are contributing to political turmoil. Because you can turn around and say, you know what, even option A looks like weakening the argument because it introduces an alternate cause. But actually, it is not. Look at the phrasing. It says contribute to political turmoil. It adds to the problem, not that it is a primary cause or it is causing the problem, right? So therefore, that there's that difference in the phrasing. Option A and option D, man is by nature a beast, is completely irrelevant to the argument. Option A is correct here, everyone. Okay. Okay, let's do this one. All right. So it says a professor of business placed a case study assignment for her class on her university's computer network. She later found out that instead of reading the assignment on the computer screen, 50 out of 70 students printed. Therefore, the conclusion is books delivered via computer will not make printed books obsolete. Digital books will not make the printed books obsolete. Why? Because they saw a behavior in 70 students. 50 out of those 70 students actually printed the assignment. They did not do it on the computer screen. Author's point, printed books will not go obsolete because of the digital books. That's the author's point. And we have to support it. Now, remember when I said identify the conclusion, which we have already done in this argument, and also try to think of an option that will bolster this claim or strengthen this claim, right? Now, looking at the argument, what do you think? Is this a really good argument or a not so good argument? I don't find it to be a really good argument. So just imagine the author is making this universal, sort of a universal claim that printed books will not go obsolete. Will not go obsolete where? In a university, in a classroom, in a town, in a city, or in the world. Actually, the author is implying in the world. And it is that sort of universal acclaim. Based on what evidence? 50 of 70 students in his or her classroom. Is that a big sort of data, big enough data to support such a universal claim? That in one classroom, 50 out of 70 students behaved in a certain way. Not so big, right? Not so, let's say, not so big a data point to actually support that universal acclaim, right? The other problem with this argument is just look at the evidence. So we can say this is the premise, right? This is the premise. And look at the conclusion. So in the premise, the author was talking about assignments. In the conclusion, the author starts talking about books. And what's the problem there? Premise में बोल रहा है they did not do the assignments on the screen. Conclusion में बोल रहा है therefore printed books will not go obsolete because of digital books. And we understand there is a difference between assignments and books. Maybe these people, when they are doing assignments, they want to print it and they have to sort of solve something there. They have to make notes somewhere, and that's why they are printing the assignments. And maybe when they are reading books, they are fine reading those books digitally. The author is assuming the way they are behaving with respect to assignment is the same way they'll behave with respect to the books, right? So, as I said, there are two problems with this argument. Number one, it's the data used to support the conclusion, it's not so big. Number two, there is a jump from assignments to the books. We would need an option to address either one of those issues or both of them. Let's go into the options. Option A says, several colleagues of the professor have found that in their non-business courses, several of their students behave similarly in relation to assignments placed on the computer network. So option A looks like supporting the argument by telling us there's one more professor, or there are some professors. Several would mean some. Some would mean it could be one, it could be two, it could be, you know, five, or it could be 50, right? but it could also be just one. Chalo, one नहीं लेते हैं, two ले लेते हैं. It could be just two colleagues, it could be five, it could be 50, right? So even in their sort of subjects, students actually printed assignments. Now, option A looks like some more data to support the conclusion, but it is still not talking about books. Will they behave in the same way with regard to the books? We are still not sure, and several or some looks like a weak option. It could be just one colleague, it could be two, or it could be five, right? So it's again not that big a data to support as universal a claim as the one in the conclusion in the argument. Let's look at B. Studies consistently show that most computer users will print reading material that is more than a few pages in length rather than read it on the computer screen. So just look at this, how the phrasing of this option goes. Studies consistently show most computer users. Who's a computer user? Somebody who's likely to read books on the computer, right? Somebody who owns a computer and who can read books on the computer, right? Most of them, not some people, not some students in the class, not defined, not restricted only to a class. Most computer users would be, again, a universal sort of a claim. Most computer users out there in the world will print reading material. What is a reading material? Reading material is anything that I read. It will include books. Will actually print, right? More than a few pages. Will a book be more than a few pages? Yes, of course. Will actually print than read it on the computer screen. So option B is basically telling us that most people who are likely to read a book on the computer will actually print a book, print the pages, and then read it instead of reading it on the computer screen. And most of them would do this. So option B provides a much more substantial support for the conclusion than option A, which again, option A just talks about assignments and not really books, and just talks about some colleagues, some more colleagues, right? So option B is a far better option than A. We can let go of A. And remember this, right? When you are solving these questions in critical reasoning or RCs or legal reasoning, if you find an option better than the previous one, let go of the previous one, right? Just don't keep it hanging in the air. C. Some people get impaired vision from long periods of reading printed matter on computer screens, even if they use high quality computer screens. So again, this shows a potential downside of reading it from the computer screen. But again, this option is not a great option because it talks of some people. And some people, again, in critical reasoning terms, could be one or two or five. And that will not really sort of support the argument about people printing books and not really, or printed books not going obsolete because of digital books, right? So some people is, again, not that strong an option. Compared to B, C is also out. The other problem I think with C is we don't really know if people also get impaired vision while reading books on the computer screen, or let's say while reading books that are printed. What if many people also get impaired vision when they read a book, paperback or hardback, right? तो वो कंपैरिजन भी ड्रॉ किया हुआ नहीं है सी में कि कंप्यूटर स्क्रीन पे ज्यादा खराब होती हैं कंपेयर टू द बुक, right? So that comparison is also not there. It is a feeble, weak option. D is still better. C goes out. D says scanning technology is very poor, causing books delivered via computer to be full of errors unless editors carefully read the scanned version. How does scanning technology picture here? So we understand, right? The earlier books would have been printed first because they were typed on a typewriter, printed, and then they were made into digital books. तो प्रोसेस कुछ ऐसा होगा कि ये प्रिंटेड बुक है, राइट, एंड देन यू आर स्कैनिंग इट, राइट, स्कैन, and then it becomes a digital book, right? So this option says scanning technology is very poor. What happens is when you make a printed book into a digital book, there are a lot of errors that are introduced. What will you read if that's the case? कि digital book में errors हैं. Will you read the digital book or will you read the printed book? Obviously, you will read the printed book, and you can then say printed books will not go obsolete because of the digital books. That looks like strengthening the argument, but hang on, it doesn't. Because of the latter part, I'm using a different color. Because of the latter part of this option, the latter part of this option says, unless editors carefully read the scanned versions. In order for this option to be correct, we will have to assume that editors will not correct these mistakes. For example, when I scan a printed book, make it into a digital book, there are errors introduced, and then the authors, the editors, sorry, they do a proofreading and editing, and they render a version of the digital book which is without any error, right? Without errors. Then that's okay, right? कि ठीक है, scanning से errors आ गई digital book में, but they have edited it and there are no errors. Then there is no real sort of then it does not support the argument, right? तो ये जो latter part है, ये बोल रहा है conditional है. अगर editors book सही से edit नहीं करेंगे, we can't readily assume कि वो book सही से edit नहीं करेंगे, right? We can't assume that. Had this not been part of this option, then even this option would have strengthened the argument. But yes, there has to be only one correct option, and D is a trap in that sense. Okay? So option D is out. It does not definitely tell us that printed books will not go obsolete because of digital books. Option B is the correct one. Okay, so we are spending some time on these questions because the two questions that we did confuse a lot of people, right? But yes, in order to get a hold on strengthened questions, right? We will look at some of these questions and spend some time on these questions. Once the concept forms up in your head, you'll be able to solve them pretty quickly, right? It won't take this much of a time. Okay, let's solve this one. This again is a peculiar question. But yes, let's solve this one. And while we are solving these questions, I would suggest you pause the video, go through the question, solve it on your own, and then resume the video. Okay. Nonetheless, we'll solve this one together. So the medical doctor says, and this is the argument of a medical doctor, sleep deprivation is the cause of many social ills, ranging from irritability to potentially dangerous instances of impaired decision making. Then it says most people today suffer from sleep deprivation to some degree. Therefore, herein comes the conclusion, and we have to focus on the conclusion every time we are solving a strengthened question. Therefore, we should restructure the workday to allow people flexibility in scheduling their work hours. We should do this. Whatever this means, restructure the workday to allow people flexibility in scheduling their work hours. Whatever this means, right? So the author talks about the problem of sleep deprivation, right? Problem is what? Sleep deprivation. Sleep deprivation would mean lack of enough sleep. And solution is restructuring the workday. Okay, restructuring the workday. So whenever the author points out a problem and proposes a solution, the assumption is the solution will work, yes or no, right? तो author एक problem statement दे रहा है, there is some problem, and then proposes a solution. The assumption the author makes is that this solution it will work or is likely to work. Now, what is the solution? Solution is restructuring the workday. The assumption is that this will work. This will take care of sleep deprivation. It will reduce sleep deprivation. That's the assumption, right? Now, a quick look at the options, right? We have to find something that strengthens the doctor's argument, right? A quick scan of the options, right? And I sort of stop, take a pause at B. Employees would get more sleep. Get more sleep would mean sleep deprivation is out, right? No sleep deprivation. If they had greater latitude, latitude का मतलब हो गया freedom या flexibility. If they had greater flexibility in scheduling their work hours, और solution भी तो यही था, give employees the flexibility to schedule their work hours, restructure the work day. B says they will actually get more sleep or sleep deprivation. Ain't option B an assumption in the argument? Assumption. And we said assumptions strengthen the argument. So option B looks like a great option. But then we have to eliminate the other options because sometimes it could be the case कि assumption है, assumption दिया हुआ है option में, but वो strongest support नहीं दे रहा, right? It provides support, but it is not providing the strongest support. ये भी हो सकता है. But so far we understand B is providing support. Let's see, let's look at the other three options. The primary cause of sleep deprivation is overwork. Oh my God. And just look at what the author was saying. The author was saying कि allow people flexibility in scheduling their work hours. Author तो assume कर रहा था कि if we allow that flexibility, sleep deprivation will be taken care of. Option A says the primary cause is overwork. And we have to really differentiate between restructuring the workday and overwork. Restructuring the workday would mean, let's say, there's somebody who works from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. Restructuring would mean they start at 12 and they end at 8 p.m. So restructuring does not mean that we are reducing the number of hours. We are just allowing people flexibility in scheduling their work hours. You can change the slot. You're not reducing the number of hours, right? Author believes this will help. This is the solution. If somebody turns around and says the primary cause of sleep deprivation is overwork, will the solution now work? Author का solution है slot change कर दो. लेकिन अगर reason है overwork, then changing of slot will not work. In fact, the solution will not work. And option A will weaken the author's solution, will weaken the author's conclusion, will weaken the author's argument, right? So option A again introduces an alternate cause. I'm just writing AC, and very important concept, alternate cause ka. We will sort of look at it in greater detail when we do weekend wala topic, okay? So option A gives us an alternate cause for the problem, right? If this overwork is the reason, then scheduling the working hours will not help. So A actually weakens, A is out. Now, if you look at D, Delhi, it is very similar to A. Look at D. The extent of one's sleep deprivation is proportional to the length of one's workday. Again, talks about brings in number of hours. If that's the reason, then the solution might not work. So again, D also weakens the argument. Look at C. Individuals vary widely in the amount of sleep they require. It is at best irrelevant to the argument. At worst, it might just weaken the argument because maybe it is pointing out that one solution will not fit all. For different people, you will have to come out with different solutions. The author is assuming this solution will work for most people, right? So C is either irrelevant or weakens the argument. For sure, it is not strengthening the argument. Option B is correct. Okay. All right, let's move on to the next one. And it's slightly tricky, but yes, again, you can pause the video and solve it on your own first, and then, you can resume. All right, let's do this one. And every time I'm discussing the question, I'm switching off the camera so that that window, that face wala window, does not come in the way of your viewing the question very clearly. Okay. Supply shortages and signs of growing demand are driving cocoa prices upward. Unusually severe weather in cocoa producing regions, too much rain in Brazil, and too little in West Africa has limited production. Okay, so the author talks about supply shortages. One second, supply shortages and growing demand. What will it do? It will drive the prices up, right? Further, Europe and North America recently reported stronger demand for cocoa, right? Again, demand. In the first quarter, grinding cocoa beans, the first stage in processing cocoa for chocolate, rose 8.1% in Europe and 16% in North America, shows us the increased demand. Analysts have concluded that cocoa's prices will continue to rise at least in the near future because of this supply pressure and also the demand pressure. The prices will continue to rise at least into the near future. Again, we are looking for an option that strengthens the reasoning, provides additional support. So as we were doing previously, everything that the option says will be regarded as true. I'm just reiterating it. Options में जो भी information है उसको हम true ले रहे हैं, and we are just checking whether this information provides support to the author's conclusion in the last line of the argument, right? A says, ground cocoa beans can be stored for long periods before they spoil. Does it support the claim that prices will continue to rise? And if at all cocoa beans can be stored for long periods of time, it looks like it will address the demand, right? It will address the demand. So then there is no reason for the price to continue rising, right? So option A, again, either it is irrelevant to the conclusion in the last line, or it may be just weakening the argument. For sure, it is not strengthening it. A is out. B says, several European and North American manufacturers that use cocoa have recently improved their processing capacity. Processing capacity would mean they are probably, they are using cocoa and they are processing it in a much faster way to make it into a chocolate, right? If the processing has increased, if this time has reduced, let's say processing बढ़ गई, time कम हो गया, will it add to the demand pressure? What do you think? That use cocoa have recently improved their processing capacity. Will it add to the demand pressure or will it not? We are not sure, right? We are not sure. look, demand क्या होगी? Demand होगी, let's say we need 100 chocolates every day, right? Now, if I get 100 chocolates, let's say in 5 hours time or 3 hours time, will it add to the demand pressure? We are not sure, right? We are not sure if it really adds to the demand pressure or the demand just remains 100. So option B, we'll just keep it on the side. We don't really think it's not really sort of, at least in not a direct way, supporting the argument. Let's find a better option if there is one. C says it takes new cocoa trees 5 or 6 years before they start bearing fruit. 5 or 6 years. So one way to address the demand is increase the supply. तो अगर कोई ये बोल दे we are able to increase the supply, will I be able to say that the price will continue to rise? No, I won't be able to say that. Option C says we will not be able to we will not be able to increase the supply. Why? It takes new cocoa trees 5 or 6 years before they start bearing fruit. तो कोको का supply immediately increase नहीं हो सकता. So C shows that the supply pressure will continue to persist, and therefore C supports the claim that price will continue to rise. C is a better option than B. We can let go of B. Lastly, D, governments in Europe and North America are likely to change the current restrictions on cocoa imports. Likely to change the current restrictions on cocoa imports. How is that going to help? And what does it mean to change the current restrictions? Change का मतलब क्या है? Will they intensify the restrictions? Will they make them more strict? Or will they relax the restrictions? We don't know for sure. So on that end, it is vague. It is not telling us exactly whether they will make it more strict or whether they'll relax it. Depending on that, we can say whether it strengthens the argument or weakens it. But since we are not sure of that, that's not very clear in this option. D also is out. Option C is correct. Key supply pressure. Option C is showing supply pressure will continue to persist. And therefore, the prices will continue to rise at least into the near future, at least for the next 5 or 6 years. C is correct. Okay. So we can take up the last question. Maybe this one. Again, you can pause the video and you can then resume it after you have done it on your own. Right. But let's do it together for now. A successful coffee stand that serves the workers in a large office building plans to increase its profits by adding oatmeal to its menu. And we have some definition of oatmeal, a hot cereal popular among the workers. The manager says that oatmeal is the ultimate convenience food because it can be served by the cup as coffee is. Further, offering oatmeal will enable to stand to get into the breakfast business without making a large investment. So 2 points. Number one, it is easy to serve, and two, it does not need a large investment. Okay? And we have to strengthen the likelihood that manager's plan will achieve its goal. Manager का plan क्या है? Introducing oatmeal in their menu. So let's see which option supports the plan. A says, some of the office buildings businesses have recently begun providing free coffee to their employees. Okay, does it impact anything? They have started providing free coffee. How does that matter? We are especially concerned with oatmeal in the menu. Coffee is not an alternative. Coffee is not replacing oatmeal. Option A is out. B says the ingredients needed to make oatmeal are inexpensive. Okay, that takes care of the large investment part. It says inexpensive, not making a large investment. And do not spoil easily the way many breakfast foods typically sold at coffee stands do. Do not spoil easily. So this contributes to the convenience point, right? तो पहला पॉइंट था without making a large investment. उसको support कर रहा है by calling the ingredients, by telling us that the ingredients are inexpensive. And secondly, do not spoil easily. So then the convenience part. So option B looks good, that introducing oatmeal will be profitable. C says in order to offer more flexible schedules to their workers, several businesses in the office building will soon be expanding their hours. Expanding their hours and flexible schedules. What if flexible scheduling entails not calling people in the morning and allowing them flexibility in scheduling their workers, जो अभी हमने थोड़ी देर पहले discuss किया था, कि they are allowing people to start at 2 p.m. and work till 10 p.m. That's the kind of flexibility maybe they are pointing out. In that case, not many people will turn up for the breakfast, right? So then in that case, it might just hamper the plan, right? Whatever be the case, maybe it helps them, maybe it does not. Option C does not tell us very clearly whether it will help them or not. So option C again is vague on that aspect, and therefore we are not sure if it strengthens the plan. C is out. Option B is still a better option. D says supermarket sales of oatmeal and other cereals slowed this year following large gains last year. Okay, again, either it is a no impact option, not relevant to the claim, or it might just weaken the argument कि oatmeal का sales slow हो गया. स्लो होने से जरूरी नहीं है कि ओटमील की पॉपुलैरिटी कम हो गई. एक्चुअली वो बोल रहा है फॉलोइंग लार्ज गेन्स. मे बी दीज गेन्स वर, लेट्स से, not proportional or not completely justified, right? Maybe now it is down to actual levels. हो सकता है ओटमील का बहुत it became a fad and the gains were sort of exceptional. कि पहले 100 oatmeal packets बिकते थे, in the last to last year it was 150, and now from 150 it is back to 100, maybe normal sales. So it could be back to normal, or it could have been, or maybe it's a reduction. In both the cases, it does not support the argument. So as I said, it is either irrelevant or weaken the argument, but surely not strengthening the argument. Option B is a straightforward choice. B is correct, right? So, as I had said earlier, in the beginning, that strengthen is not that complex a topic, right? Maybe assumption is because we are testing assumptions on two counts. First, it is relevant to the argument in the sense that it supports the argument, and it is necessary also for the argument. So we are checking for support, we are also checking for necessity. On two counts, we are checking assumptions. But in strengthen, we are just doing a simple test, take this information to be true, and check whether it supports the author's conclusion or not. If it does, it is the right option, right? So strengthen in that way is an easier topic compared to assumption, and also weaken. In the next class, we will take up weaken the argument, right? Again, we'll discuss the concept and apply it on some previous year questions, okay? We'll end the video here, right? I'll see you in the next class next week. Remain sort of attuned to this channel, subscribe, and I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye bye.